Hi, all. Hey, Michael. So your names are going to be public tonight, just so you know. So if you want to go out and come back in under a fake name, feel free to. I think I posted. I think I made a mistake. I posted the link, so people that are coming on as presenters. They won't show, but they'll be listed in the wrong area. So, Michael, can you see other names on the list of attendees? Julie and Laura. No, you can't. Oh, maybe. Interesting. I thought they would show tonight. And Julie and Laura, can you see each other or Michael? Nope. Can you see when it comes up in the chat box? Can you see each other's names? Michael, send me a screenshot. Oh, you can see the name, yes, in the chat box? Okay. I'll let people know that then too. Okay, great. Yeah, tonight we wanted to do it so that people could see their names. So like I said, I'm going to repost this a few times as people get on. The message that I have. Let's see. Yeah. And now I can say hi to people because your names are public. We're going to start in about 4 or 5 minutes probably. I'm just going to keep posting that as people join us, so just so you all know why that's a repeating message. If I pin it, does it stay there? I think that, there's even a typo in it. Can you see that? Is it pinned at the top that your names will appear tonight? Feel free to exit and come back under another name if you want. Yes? Good. I just want to make sure it stays there so people logging on will see. And you can see each other's names when you comment, right? But you can't see the list. Is that correct? Okay. Perfect. You can see the list of names. Somebody said they can. I think if you're on a computer, you can. Maybe if you're on a cell phone, you can't. Yeah, I think this is a first for us to try it this way, so we'll see how this goes. For those of you just joining us, my microphone is far away. That's probably a lot better, I imagine. Okay, so I think if you're on a phone, you can't see the list of names. But if you're on a laptop or a tablet or a desktop, you can see the names. And I'm going to put some of you back in the group because I made a mistake. We're going to wait a few minutes after the hour to give more people a chance to log on. Okay, got it. Thanks, Michael. So if you're logging on, you know your name is appearing. If you want to log out and come back under a different name, you're welcome to do that. I see Anne, Becky, Betsy, Bruce, Denise, Ellen, Jennifer, Joanne, Julie, Kelly, Laura, Lisa, Mar or Mary, Max, Michael, Nicole, Patty, Peter, Robin, and Sally so far, and Sarah. And I think somebody else just joined us. And the president is on with us tonight, so good. He'll get some good information. Maybe it'll help him to relax a little bit. Nicole has joined us. Lexi. I'll wait till a couple more minutes. Good to see you all. So before we start rolling and getting started, I suppose my question is, if you have questions, we'll start. I think like we have the last few nights with some breathing and relaxing. I think we all could use that. It helps me each time we do this. So we're going to start with a few minutes of breathing, and we're going to do some square breathing, and I'll describe that a little bit later. Excuse me. But I'm going to be asking for questions, for what's working for you, for ideas, and I'll do my best to keep up with the chat. For those of you that are just joining us, your name appears on the screen. We kind of warned you on the invite tonight, and if you want to log out and come back in under a pseudonym, you're welcome to do that. But I thought we would try for the first time ever to have a list of people's names on the screen for us this evening. So it allows me to interact personally with you too. Thanks, Nicole. Glad to have you. Maybe you all, while we're waiting, we're going to start in about a minute. Maybe you all can type in, well, I was going to ask you how you know about this, but that asks you, I guess you can choose to give away your confidentiality if you want to. So, yeah, just kind of where you come from in terms of your relationship with Evoke or how you heard about this. That'd be nice. Might be nice to see. We have a lifer on here. From a friend in another support group. Great. Married to a lifer group. From an intensive and then sending friends to the intensives. That's I know about that. Parent, daughter was a client. Twitter. This is kind of fun. We've never done this before. Some of you have had many relationships with Evoke. Wonderful. So I'm going to begin. That's right. I remember your nephews. You did the first family intensive. Okay. So, welcome. I'm going to move someone down to a participant. So, make sure I didn't lose you. Perfect. So let's do some square breathing where we're going to breathe in for a count of 5. We're going to hold it for a count of 5. We're going to breathe out for a count of 5, and then we're going to hold it for a count of 5. So like I said before, welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. Today is Monday, March 23rd, 2020. We're amidst the coronavirus pandemic, and many of us are either sheltering in place or practicing social distancing. The particular challenge that presents to all of us, there are many particular challenges. But one of the first challenges is it cuts off our social contact with others. Even at work, even my children said to me this week that the hardest part for them is not having contact with friends at school, and that while their online school is present, it's not the same as that kind of physical person-to-person contact. And one of the ways that we get through trying times like this is to have that kind of personal contact. So this evening, what we decided to do was to open this up publicly, to allow you to come on with your public names, and to be able to share with each other the things that you're having questions or concerns about or struggling with. but also the things that you're finding to be helpful for you. And then I'll try to share, kind of facilitate and share my own perspectives on this. So when we are under chronic stress, I've said this before, each time we begin, when we are under chronic stress, there is a chemical release in our body of cortisol that over an extended period of time can cause harm to the body unless we do something about it. And we really have two basic choices when dealing with stress. One is to utilize the energy that is being put into our system, right? Exercise is a fantastic way when there's an immediate threat or stressor, and our hypothalamus connects with the adrenal glands and releases epinephrine or adrenaline, then it gives us the energy to jump out of the way of a speeding car that's approaching us. So we can make use of the energy, or we can learn kind of a biohack, and that's really what meditation is. It's a way of kind of down-regulating the nervous system response to the stress that we're all experiencing. So while we're sitting here on this, I want to begin this evening with some down-regulation. So I'm going to lead us through a few minutes of square breathing. For those of you that just joined us, square breathing is going to be a breathing in for a 5 count, a holding for a 5 count, breathing out for a 5 count, a holding for a 5 count, and then back up again. I'm going to start with just some basic mindful breathing. And I wanted to share this with you. I had this experience this weekend that I was doing some meditation this weekend. And one of the things that happened to me while I was meditating and focusing on my breath was gratitude for my breath. And then that made me think about the fact that the virus that's sweeping the planet right now is a virus that makes it difficult to breathe. Hey, Steve, if you can help me, that'll be helpful. People's names are public, and I'll utilize you as we go along. But people, the virus that's sweeping the planet is making it difficult for people to breathe. So for me, during my meditations this weekend, I had a special moment of gratitude for my breath, because some people on the planet right now are finding it difficult to breathe. And so to focus on the breath at this point, to concentrate on it, is to invite awareness to the gift that it is for those of us who have the ability to breathe. So I'll put that thought out there because it was something that I had as an awareness this weekend during my meditation. So Steve, if somebody comes and pops up to the presenter because I sent out the wrong link, please click on their name and then just make them an audience member instead of a presenter. It's not that much different this evening, but it might be helpful. So, okay, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes or lower your gaze if that's helpful. And to begin, I'm just going to ask you to notice your breath. I'm going to invite you to breathe in and out through your nose. Don't change your breath right now. Just notice it. Feel it. Feel the sensation of the air coming in and out of your nostrils. Notice the rise and fall of your torso. Some of you might be breathing in through your chest. Some of you might be breathing into your belly. As you focus on your breath, it may begin to slow a little. If you find your mind wandering, that's okay. You can just observe it. And then when you're able, bring it back to a focus on your breath. In just a moment, I'm going to ask you to end with an out breath So on the count of 5, I'm going to ask you to end with an out breath and then hold it for 5 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hold it. Breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hold it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Out breath. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now you can do that in your mind. And when you're ready, finish your last out breath and bring your awareness and your eyes back to the broadcast. Part of what we're doing with the nervous system is we're kind of tricking it. We're teaching it. We're practicing reminding it that there's no imminent threat right now. It's actually the similar process we go through when we go to sleep. Some people will say that when they are asked to meditate or led in meditation, they'll fall asleep. And what that can be a signal to you is that you're tired. That if you allow yourself to relax, that you'll actually fall into sleep and unconsciousness. And so the idea when under stress, when under duress, when feeling chronic levels of stress, is you act as if you're not being threatened. You focus on your breath. You give gratitude for your breath. You slow down your breath. And in doing so, you're signaling to the nervous system that you're not at a threat. And then what we perceive is kind of conscious thought, right? Intentional thought becomes automatically calmer and downregulated, and a sense of well-being emerges. So that's the idea behind focusing on the breath. And like I said at the top of the broadcast, at a time when the specific pandemic that we're faced with right now causes difficulty in breathing, I can't think of a better practice than spending some time each day returning to your breath. Sometimes a good mantra, a simple mantra when breathing, is simply to say, I'm breathing out and I'm breathing in. And just repeating that mantra over and over again. And finding yourself kind of focus on that. One other thing I want to say about this yoga or meditation, it's a microcosm of really the outcome of therapy that's helpful for us if we can not judge ourselves when we're meditating, right? There's no right way to do it. So if I were processing it right now and asking you how that went for you, and you said, well, I was distracted, or it didn't work for me, or I found myself thinking about other things, or I decided not to do it, the idea is just to observe that, to notice that. There's no right and wrong, good or bad in it. It's just an opportunity to observe yourself. And then the idea is to kind of carry that, right? To create a practice where we do that a little bit each day, and then to carry that or generalize that to the rest of our lives, where we can learn to not judge ourselves, to observe ourselves in the process. So With that, I would like to open it up to any questions or helpful suggestions that anybody has. To remind you, your names will be on this. So if you type something, it's going to be listed there. You can ask any question about therapy, anxiety, stress, parenting, addiction, self-medicating, depression. It can be anything from practical, asking for practical suggestions, which I can answer, but also others can answer, to practical help, to kind of the more spiritual side of things. I just released a paper today, it was actually this weekend, in Psychology Today, called Uncommon Sense in Uncommon Times. And the idea in it was to talk a little bit more about the spiritual dilemma that we're all faced with during these times, the opportunity for a reset, and to observe the dangerous aspect of becoming consumed by our fear and what that can do for us. So while I mentioned briefly some of the practical aspects that everybody has a list of today, I wanted to talk about the spiritual aspects of this particular dilemma. So are there any questions? Hi, Nancy. It's good to see you. Been a while. Few people are typing, so we'll wait for those to come up. I have at least 3 Canadians I count. So welcome, Canada. Four people are typing right now. You know what I was thinking the other day? Right now, wouldn't it be cool if some of the news shows all started off with a breathing exercise? And I thought about that, and I thought, what bad TV it would be. What bad TV it would be if a news anchor or a news show started off a broadcast with a breathing exercise. I'm sure that if you tuned in the middle of me breathing, closing my eyes, that was really bad broadcast time for you. But maybe that's what we need right now. We need some out of the box thinking. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if you tuned into your favorite news broadcast and once an hour they led the public in just a 3-minute even exercise of breathing and then sent it to commercial and came back. I think that would be fantastic. I wish there was a way to get that message to the news broadcast and see if anybody would be willing to do it. Somebody writes, curious about intensives. I have chronic fatigue syndrome. Would I manage? Absolutely. In fact, I'll share with you just this weekend, I was participating in an intensive where somebody was struggling with sleep patterns, including sleeping past the time that was set for the wake-up time. And we just made space for them. See, the idea of therapy is that you get to show up as you are. Now, if your group members can hold space for you, fantastic. If they struggle, then we talk about this. It becomes a kind of a metaphor. So I fell asleep during a piece of psychodrama. I was cast in a role off in a corner by myself, and I could barely hear the talking way off at the other side of the room, and I dozed off a few times. And at first I was very judgmental and felt guilty, but then I remembered I was just tired, and it was probably a great metaphor for how this particular role that I was playing felt as that role in this role play that we're doing. So you really get to show up as you are. As long as you're physically safe and not on substances, then showing up as you are is fully welcomed. And if, we had an intensive a couple of years ago where a very young adult came to the program. And it became very clear early on that he didn't really want to be there of his own volition, and that his parents probably used leverage or some kind of coercion to get in there. And so he showed up. And so it became very clear very early on that he didn't want to participate, at least didn't have a lot of self-motivation. And we let him be. He skipped some of the sessions. There was actually one point in the session when he fell asleep on the ground in the middle of some of the work. And everybody, including myself, just kind of stepped around him and made space for him. And I had a couple of the other participants who were parents, come back to me and said they learned more from that part of the experience maybe than from anything else. Because they learned that he wasn't really getting in the way of anybody else, and we just let him be how he was. And I'm not saying it needs to be that extreme where you fall asleep in the middle of the group circle. And we talked about and kind of joked about with admiration about his ability to just kind of get what he needed at the moment that he needed it. So you get to show up as you are. I don't know how it shows up specifically, but you would get to participate as you are. And then other people would learn from allowing you to be you in that space. The same way when you were present with them, you were allowing them to be them. And that might be an extreme example, but I think it applies to your question. Michael writes, isolating is what I do when I fall into depression. Tips on staying on top of my mental state. Michael, first of all, Michael was one of the people that encouraged, that by her question, encouraged me to do this tonight. So I want to give you credit for that. Not just tonight, but this whole series. You were one of the people that kind of tipped me over the edge and said, I should start doing this. You reached out to me last week on social media. So I want to tell you, you made a difference to a lot of other people because people have expressed appreciation for these. And I've expressed appreciation for these. So when isolation is part of what you do when you fall into depression, you reached out to me on social media. You asked me for if we were doing anything to support people. I felt connected to you, reached back out to you eventually and told you that we were doing these. And now you're here and now you're sharing. And so, Michael, I think you're doing it. You're finding, I mean, we all have our pet peeves about social media and technology, right? We all know kind of the pitfalls of technology and social media. Having said that, this particular tool that we're using right now, a webinar, is actually one of the benefits. And so, one of the things that I've been doing all in the last week, and other people can answer, is I am reaching out to friends that are single, right? I've been reaching out to them and checking in on them and seeing how they're doing and spending 15 minutes with several different friends, just checking in on them and seeing how they're doing. So you as an isolator, if that's your kind of way of managing your mood swings or your depression, you may need to reach out and to do that kind of work. I've said this to other people. For those of you that are kind of new to this and haven't been on the 4 that we did last week, I want to say this emphatically. You might have to do something different than you were doing 2 weeks ago. So while things that were going on in the world and the way that you were coping worked for you 2 weeks ago, and you weren't meditating, you weren't attending these broadcasts, you weren't listening to podcasts, you weren't calling friends just to connect for 15 minutes, you might have to do something different. Because when stress is added to our life, if we just do the same thing that was working for us, it might not work for us. So just a thought. But Michael, I wanted to give you credit for this, and nice job. Nice job showing up, nice job sharing, and nice job making a difference for not just yourself, but everybody else. Kelly says, yes, I am starting all my client meetings and leadership team meetings with mini meditations and breathing. Breathing exercises, Patty says, are great to help us relax and get focused. I do this at the beginning of each class for K through 5. Kids thrive on this. I don't know where I saw it. You could easily Google it because it's very popular. But I saw that some school or school district was replacing detention with meditation, and the results for behavior were fantastic. So I love, Patty, that you're doing that. Nancy says, my son's treatment, which has been going on for 3 years, has stopped suddenly, 2 months short. No home contract in place yet. AA meetings are not available, and he is not into FaceTime meetings. Any suggestions on how we can support him in this transitional time, especially with people in self-isolation? I'm open to any suggestions. Happy to read those if you guys have suggestions. Nancy, my thought is, this is my first thought, is to offer him suggestions, but hold them lightly. I think with children, sometimes we think we know what they need, and sometimes we do, and sometimes they don't. That's a fact of life. But part of what you can be aware of is children might not need what we think that they need. And so ask him what he needs. And I think I think these times call for us to break the rules. Okay? Was it Eleanor Roosevelt who said, I think it was, who said well-behaved women never make history? Was that her? If it wasn't her, it was some president's wife who said that around that time. Great artists break rules, right? Innovators break rules. And so I think about this example. When I have a group that's difficult in the field, right, where there's a lot of dynamics that are difficult, where there's struggles and a lot of people are activating each other, one of the things that I teach the staff is lower your expectations. I saw a post this week on social media where somebody said, instead of trying to get this really complex, robust curriculum if you're homeschooling, just read with your kids. I saw a funny one today that said, put movies on and and turn the volume off and put the subtitles on, and boom, your children are reading. But and on a more serious note, when you lower the bar from science, mathematics, all the things that are possible in a really organized curriculum, and you just turn it into reading, even taking turns reading, you lower everybody's stress level in the family. And I think what's hard for all of us, by the way, this is true in daily life, right? Our expectations are some of what cause our distress. And then we come into a situation like this where we try to maintain some expectations. And I've heard all kinds of suggestions in the media and online about things that people can do. And we start measuring ourselves against somebody's 12 suggestions of having a productive, cohesive family life. And what I would invite for all of you is consider breaking rules. Consider breaking from what other people tell you should be doing in terms of the ideal way of operating at home. Lower the bar, right? And just get to a point where you realize you're kind and compassionate to yourself and you're trying to survive. If there's anything that I think that this time can teach us, or I should say, amongst the things that this time can teach us, is compassion for ourselves. Right? Be kind to yourselves. Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddhist monk, says, treat your depression and your anxiety like you would a little child. And say to it, dear one, I am here for you. Maybe I'll read some passages, because I'm doing this 4 times this week. Maybe I'll read some passages from Thich Nhat Hanh's book, Be Here Now, to emphasize this idea of self-love and self-kindness, and stop holding ourselves to an unrealistic standard of functioning like many of us do on a daily basis. I know I do on a daily basis, but definitely will become harmful during times when resources are limited, options are limited. So that was a long answer to it, Nancy, but I hope that's helpful. If there are any other suggestions that people are making, I'll get to those as I read down. The other evening, someone said these difficult times are bringing out the kindness in us. And my son, anxiety brings out the opposite. It is so hard, Lexi says, for me to be understanding and compassionate, even trying to remember the fear underneath any advice. I know this will sound like a broken record a little bit, but Lexi and people can comment on it, but you're not alone. Thank you for writing in the question. It goes back to this idea of self-compassion and compassion for others. The practice of self-compassion really is the basis or the foundation of compassion towards others. It really is. When we learn to be kind to ourselves and the ways that our inner selves act out and seek attention and seek comfort, when we do that for ourselves, we're more apt to do it for other people. So I would say start with self-compassion for you about how difficult it is to deal with your son, to watch him being anxious. And that's one thing you can relate to. I had one father, I've told this story many years ago. One father, after working with me and then having a behavioral contract and his son breaking the behavioral contract, he went back. He called me several months later and said, Brad, I know I shouldn't go and lecture, but I just couldn't believe my son was breaking the behavioral contract. And so I went up there and I lectured and I yelled at him and I said, I can't believe, even though you know you're not supposed to do this and it's in the contract, you're still doing it. So I said to this father, so let me just reflect back what I heard you say. You said you know you're not supposed to lecture, you know you're not supposed to yell, and then you went and lectured to your son and yelled at your son for not doing what he knows he's supposed to do. So go back and apologize, right? You know why he's doing it, because it's very, very difficult not to be a victim to our own instincts, right? Our mother tongue, our old way of being. So my thought is have compassion for yourself for how difficult it is. Hopefully that compassion can extend to your son. One thing I talked about last week that I think is important, this is a little bit different than that, is take time and separation from each other as needed. Like owning your triggers. One mother asked about this last week, like owning your own triggers and realizing that you're responsible for your own triggers. So finding creative ways to take separate space, to listen to music on headphones. With sometimes in my family, I have to take a walk, leave, do something so that I'm taking some responsibility for my triggers. And when you do get triggered, I guess the other side of that is own your triggers. It's not about them. Right? Just talk about the fact that you have a limited capacity, and that will reduce their anxiety, because they are upset that it's made to think in some ways that it's about them. So when they understand and see you taking responsibility for your triggers, for your own humanness, then it reduces the overall tension in the family. And like Ram Dass says, Ram Dass, the great guru who just passed away just a couple of months ago, said, if you think you're enlightened, spend a week with your family. And he passed away just before the coronavirus outbreak. And I'm sure he would be repeating that quote many times today. If you think you're enlightened, wait till you have to shelter in place or social distance and stay at home with your family. Again, I'll get to the other comments and suggestions because these are just mine. One person says, Charity says, I've not spoken to my son in 6 weeks and that hurts. I miss him. I remember when my son was in treatment. I sent him, of course. He's 27 now. He was 13, turned 14 then. I remember that I had this parent that was off in a faraway country on another continent for a trip that they had planned. It was actually a mission trip to do some service in another country, in Africa, I believe. And their son was with me, and he had just demonstrated some self-harm. And I remember thinking, called me and he said, should I come home? We weren't removing his son from the program, but it was a moment of mild, moderate crisis. And his son was safe, but he had done something in the field to try to harm himself. And at that time, my son was in treatment. So this is 13 years ago, 14 years ago. And I said, here's the way that it works. You take care of the kids over there. I'll take care of your son. And somebody's taking care of my son right now. And it gave me this sense of interdependence that we have with each other. I share the quote often. I have in the last week that Alice Miller says that a mother, because that's the way that it was talked about in 1979, that a mother can give her child what the child needs if only she allows it to get it from somebody else. So I think all those things can be of comfort. But maybe the most comfort, Charity, is that everybody's felt that. Most of the people on this broadcast have felt that. And in that way, you're not alone. And I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad you're talking about it. And in some ways, there's no way to take away the pain and the sting of the separation. Right? You might be able to find some comfort and know that he is safe and where he needs to be. But even I can't talk you out of grief and loss. All I can do is be here with you. And I'm not overstating this, and I take this role as webinar moderator very seriously. I am honored that you would spend this evening with us for an hour and share with us, a group of strangers, your pain And we can say back to you, and I'm sure other parents can comment on it, that you're not alone, and we've been there, and we get it. Ellen says, I was so struck by something, maybe for another webinar or podcast of yours, about how anxiety causes us to project outwards. It's helpful all the time for myself, but I'm finding it amazing now. There's a lot of behavior that I'm observing that falls in that bucket. I'm much more able to understand what might be going on. It's going to be so strange when this is over, right? I was saying to somebody today, I hope we don't go back to the way things were, right? I hope we have some new awareness and spiritual awakenings. And anytime, when we're under stress, whatever the stress is, and this is the coolest thing about this particular stress is that it's shared with everybody on the globe. That's the neatest thing for me, is that it's shared with everybody. So an interesting aspect of it is that that everybody that we talk to knows something about the experience that we're having right now. And the thing about anxiety is it absolutely lies to us. Somebody was telling me today that I was talking to a therapist doing some therapy supervision, and the therapist was describing, our therapist here in our program was saying, my anxiety, my fear tells me that things are fundamentally, uniquely, tragically different. And this is different than most of us have ever experienced. But in some ways, they're all the same. I'll tell you what I think is a cool story. I don't know if I told this last week or not. I was in therapy with my wife. I don't go to couples therapy very often, but we were navigating a particular crisis. It's been about 8 years since we had a couples therapy session. And predominantly all of my therapy is individual therapy, and my wife's also. But I wanted her to come in and to talk about something with me. And so we were talking about this dynamic that you're talking about. She was getting anxious about something and then projecting it onto me to fix. And then I was feeling agitated, like I was doing something wrong and didn't feel like I could fix it. And so we started to get into an old conflict, one that we had many years ago, and it started to feel familiar to me. So I wanted some help. So we were in session talking about this, and I was talking about my feelings, and she was beginning to talk about hers. And she talked about how scared she was. And she said, I'm scared. And then she started to explain why. And our therapist, we have the same therapist, our therapist said to her, just stop right there. You're scared. And my wife said, and tears started to well up, and she said, can't I explain why? And she said, just try just saying to him, you're scared. So she turned to me and she said, with her eyes filling up with tears, she said, I'm scared. And I reached out and touched her hand, and I said, that is so easy to connect to. So easy for me to be there for you when you're afraid. And implied, of course, it's very difficult for me to be there for you when you're projecting your anxiety onto me as something I need to do to make it better. And so my thought is, exactly in line with what you're sharing, is maybe we can just share with the people that we love that we're scared. She said to our therapist, don't I have to explain why I'm scared and all the details? And she said, I don't think so. And just 4 or 5 days ago, our son said, Mom is starting to say in the last couple of weeks, that she's scared, and then she doesn't explain why. And I said, my wife and I kind of caught each other's eye and laughed a little bit and just connected on it. So you're right about that. Thank you, Michael. Betsy says. Nicole says, my son has spent a lot of time in isolation in the past year and a half. Now that he is sober 6 on meds and out of rehab recovery program, he is ready to engage when the world is inside. Do you have any advice for him? More than advice, I would ask him for solutions, what he thinks. I was sharing this the other night, and it led into my instructions for this most recent intensive, after the last intensive, that one of the mantras or the self-talk that we can use to not dismiss or minimize or rescue people from their feelings, and rescuing is it's really just a euphemism for trying to make somebody feel something they're not feeling, right? One of the ways that we can, one mantra that we can repeat in our head, and I've been doing it in the last couple of weeks, is try not to be helpful. And I know that might sound strange, but it means to just listen, to thank the other one for sharing, to sit with them in their pain, their discomfort, and their anxiety. And that is so hard for most of us to do, right? Our, what I call empathic misery, empathic suffering is so great that we try to get the other person to feel better so we can feel better. And that really goes to the heart of anxious attachment or codependency. So my answer to the question would to be present with him, to ask him for what he thinks, and if he feels hopeless. Here's the thing about hopelessness and advice. When someone feels hopeless or trapped or frustrated or helpless, and you offer suggestions, you know what they often do. They show you how those things aren't going to work. And the psychological reason why people do that, see, a lot of people just say, well, they're not open to advice. They don't want help, right? They just want to stay stuck. And as therapists, we don't think of it that way. We think of it as the reason that people respond that way is because they want people to feel the way they're feeling unconsciously. So when you're offering advice to somebody who's feeling hopeless and helpless, and you find them shutting it down, and that's why I encourage you to hold your advice or suggestions very, very lightly. In the 8 Tips and Tools webinar and podcast, which you're all welcome to look at the podcast, in the 8 Tips and Tools, maybe one of the most listened to podcasts that we have, one of the suggestions is avoid advice giving and use phrases like, well, you might try, or I found it useful, or what if you tried this? But be willing and ready to back off of it very quick if the other person shoots it down. Because what they're trying to say to you is it's not that easy to solve. And if you were to come up with an easy solution, I said this last week on one of the broadcasts, if you come up with an easy solution to somebody's really difficult, painful problem, in some ways it really feels kind of threatening and minimizing of how difficult it is. So sitting with each other in the discomfort. If you want an entertaining reference point for this, I encourage you to go watch the Tom Hanks movie about Mr. Rogers called A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. I saw this blog or article a couple of months ago about Mr. Rogers where somebody was talking about Mr. Rogers when a young person was upset. He said, you know, Mr. Rogers would tell you to go out and sing a tune and try this or that. And the person said, Mr. Rogers would never try to get a child out of their feelings. Mr. Rogers would relate to the child, would empathize with the child, and then might help the child come with some ideas to express their feelings. In the movie, he talks about, and it's a very childlike way, of pounding on the piano keys, the deep keys, very loudly. Right? In anger management training, they talk about doing something physical outdoors. So try not to be helpful. Try to listen and be present. Try to sit with somebody's pain. Thank them and welcome them for sharing, not just with your words, but with your being, with your presence. Ask them questions. And any suggestions that you offer, hold on to them very lightly. One of the reasons why this format that I use with you guys is kind of cheating is because you can't push back. If I were talking to you, whoever said that, I think it was Nicole. Nicole, if you and I were sitting across from each other and I started offering some of these ideas and you were shooting them down because they wouldn't work or you've tried them already, which might be the case, I would back off really quickly. But since it's a broadcast, it's too laborious to argue with me through a text chain. Sarah says, I feel trapped between the anxiety of my son being in another state during the pandemic and the anxiety that when he comes back home, I won't be able to lead the family or get him to continue his work at home. I almost pray for schools to remain closed or martial law to be in place so that I can ensure that he won't fall into the same pattern of trying to run out and find the people he was with before. His letters and pictures all indicate an incredible shift in this, but I'm worried about how quickly things can revert, since I don't have the financial means or the time right now to get up and move far away. So it was Marilyn Monroe that said that, Michael? Is that who said that well-behaved women don't make history? So to Sarah's question or Sarah's comment, anxiety comes when we try to focus on something that we cannot control. And this pandemic is something that we cannot control. We can do our part, but ultimately we can't control it. We can't stop getting food, even if you're doing a great job of socially distancing and even sheltering in place. There's no way to 100% guarantee the illusion of control that you have over life. That's what the pandemic is here to remind us. One of many things it's here to remind us is that we don't have control. And so therapy or the practice of therapy is really a shift to focusing on what we can control. And I'm going to repeat the Serenity Prayer. Steve, if you're available, would you type the Serenity Prayer on here? You can look on it. Everybody can Google it, but I've been talking about it the last few days, but I'm going to say it twice. And if you don't have a higher power or a belief in God, it's okay. Think of it as a Serenity Meditation, okay? The Serenity Prayer or meditation goes like this. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. One more time. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Think about that. That prayer is said in virtually every 12-step support group, every day, in every city, in every country, on every continent, all over the world. So think about that. Individuals who are identifying themselves as addicts or alcoholics, drug addicts, gambling addicts, sex addicts, right? Codependence, which is just another form of addiction. Say the Serenity Prayer at each meeting where they find fellowship. When I was a teenager and I was introduced to the Serenity Prayer, I thought to myself, what does the Serenity Prayer have to do with addiction? It made no sense to me. Of course, as I grew up, it made all the sense in the world, because chemicals or any kind of self-medicating behavior, it's an attempt to not be present with yourself in your life because it's too unpleasant. And the things that we do that become a compulsion and an addiction, are immediately gratifying or work very quickly with very little work, right? In fact, the quicker the payoff, the more addictive it's considered. They say if you took a pill today and got high 24 hours from now, that virtually nobody would become addicted to that. But if you put something up your nose or in your veins and you get that high or that relief or that release, you immediately escape your own life. Our smartphones can become an escape from our life. So the Serenity Prayer asks us to develop a practice of serenity, of taking it on for ourselves and focusing on what we can and cannot control. And the funny thing I always say about the Serenity Prayer is we are so human. We are so flawed as humans that we have to pray at the end of the prayer to know the difference between what I can and can't control. And the difficulty with this outbreak is that none of us can control it, or the circumstances that are presented to us. And so all of the hacks that are being offered to us online, like doing a puzzle, doing a project, learning a language, reading a book that you've put off, exercising, all of those things are an attempt to focus on what you can control. So it's the same kind of shift that we're asking every drug addict and every alcoholic and every person who cuts on themselves and every person who binges and purges, right? And on and on and on. It's the same kind of thing that we're asking them to do, which is to remain present and develop a practice of being responsible for finding peace in their lives. My 16-year-old, Julie, says this is in reference to the suggestions for Nancy. So Nancy, I hope you're still on here. Let me see if you are. Yep, you're still here. Julie says to Nancy, my 16-year-old is doing meetings online via NAA. He has to want to do them on their own while we do our own work. Nancy, it is important for him to see us do our work. Then they will do their own work, whatever that may look like for them. You know what? You remind me of something, Julie. Go to online meetings for yourself, right? That's the way to do it. You do for them. You model for them what you want them to do. So for all of you, this practice of coming on, this is for you, right? This is for your mental health, for you to vent, to look for solutions, to talk to other people. But ultimately, we are all responsible for our own serenity. You and your child. I was talking about the intensives program just the other day, and we were doing this business meeting and this business planning strategic meeting for the year. And one of the questions from the new program director was, who is our target market for intensives? And I thought about it for a long time. And my answer was, this is for all the non-identified patients in the world. The identified patient is the one with the obvious disorder, mental health issue, addiction. The intensives is for everybody else. So maybe a way to do it is to go to your own Al-Anon meeting or your own Codependence Anonymous meeting and listen. And you have to listen with new ears, because at first it might just sound like a bunch of people talking about their woes. That's what it might sound like. But it's a different kind of process when we look a little bit deeper. It's a place we go to unload our pain to other people who can sit with it. So when we go back to the child, we don't carry it and hand it to them. Some of you know that we're doing online Zoom meetings. We were going to do this before the pandemic. I want to give ourselves credit, but we probably accelerated it a little bit since the pandemic. We're doing online Zoom meetings coming up. We have 8 scheduled in the next 5 weeks for intensives and for parents of wilderness. So it's a place where a handful of people can come and share with each other their pain, their sorrow, their grief, their anxiety, and we can just sit and listen and hold it. Sorry, my throat. I'm not getting COVID. This much talking is causing it to be dry and raw. Thank you, Julie. Michael says, thank you for sharing a bit about lowering the bar for expectations. I feel this pressure to do something with all this time. My anxiety is crippling, so my victories are completing a full day of work from home, taking a shower, breathing, etc. I mean, think about that. If you get to the end of the day breathing, you've accomplished. Those who have the coronavirus are struggling with every bit of their might to do, which is to breathe. Robin says, going back and apologizing when I react in ways that I know I'm not supposed to with my voice has been the biggest gift in moving forward with them. deflates the argument and situation. They hear me owning my stuff, and they seem to come to the table more willing to listen. And Sarah says, so true. Learning to apologize from a place of strength is one of the greatest gifts of this work. Not from a place of shame and guilt or with the intent to be forgiven, because that's about ego and not about giving. That's about taking. But learning to say, I'm sorry. In my best moments, I can say sorry effortlessly. In my less than best moments, I justify, I rationalize, I blame, I attack, I withdraw and retreat. You know, narcissists can't apologize. And we all fall somewhere on the narcissistic scale. There's this idea that narcissism is this two-pile thing, right? There's either you are or you aren't. Diagnostically, that may be true, but in reality, we all have some level of narcissistic wounding, which is early childhood wounding about being seen or not seen. The farther you are, higher you are on the narcissistic scale, the more difficult it is to apologize. The lower you are on the narcissistic scale, the more effortless it is to apologize. So it's a kind of a litmus test for where we are in that day, in that moment, in that period of our life with our own narcissism, which we all have. Some of. Betsy says, I'm 64 years old. My life has been mostly good and full of adventure and positive experiences. 9/11 changed the world forever, and my daughter was 11 when that happened. Now I am working as a volunteer in the emergency forces in our country, which has been very helpful to me in staying active and effective. Tonight, when I was driving home, I started to cry. What came up for me was how sad I felt that my now 29-year-old daughter has to live in such a dark world. She has had so many struggles and is now in a very good place. And yet I am so sad that she may never experience the joy, the true joy of life as I have known it. Yeah, I've had feelings like that. Thanks, Betsy. Julie says, I wish my husband had just heard that. I'm going to tell him. I've been projecting all of my anger onto him about our son's addiction onto him. Poor guy, it isn't his fault. I'm just afraid. That was helpful. Thank you for sharing your story. Melanie Klein, a famous developmental psychologist, described the phases we go through of life, and she made it simple. She said there are two phases. The paranoid phase is the young phase where we think that the problem or the threat, the evil is out there. The depressed phase is when we realize that the war is going on inside of here. A quote that I shared a couple of weeks ago from a book about the shadow said, from Connie Zweig, said, I began to believe that the way that I lived my life was the source of my problems. So when we shift out of the paranoid phase and believing that the problem is out there and realizing that the serenity that escapes us. I'm not talking about pain. I'm not talking about grief. I'm not talking about sorrow or sadness. I'm not even talking about fear in a moment or in a temporary moment. But when our baseline, when we are finding ourselves in a constantly agitated, angry place, we may consider that there's something inside of us, not something outside of us that needs fixing. And if we project it like Julie just said, which we've all done, which we've done to our children, which our parents did to us, when we take that back, we haven't solved the problem, but we've made clear the project. And when you change the project toward fixing your child or your spouse or the other, you have hope. Because you can fix and work on yourself over time. And ultimately, you cannot fix somebody else. And here's the irony of it all, the secret sauce. When you shift the focus to focusing on others, to focusing on yourself and your project, other people around you tend to respond with healthier behaviors in the long run. Um, Denise says, Charity, I'm so glad you're here. I understand your pain. I felt the same with my son. I don't have words to make it better, but know I am supporting you from afar. Hugs. Kristen says, oh my, that is so powerful. Thank you. Yes, my own triggers. It is that simple. I am scared. Robin says, I try and catch myself when my kids call from college and start telling me troubles, worries, etc. I have to really concentrate and try to listen. Rephrasing, as Brad just said, and sometimes I say, I'm here to listen. Would you like my thoughts, my opinions? Sometimes they say yes, and they consider my input. And when working through whatever it is, I hope this makes sense. If you find yourself, even after they say they're open to suggestions, if you find yourself being rebuffed over and over again, back off. You're talking to the defense, and it's not ready. And the defense is just a protective barrier that people put up to protect themselves from threats and pain. So if you find yourself, again, try and repeat the mantra when someone's talking, I'm going to try not to be helpful. And it's ironic. I know it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but it is because we tell ourselves that advice and solutions are helpful. So in a way, you're kind of undoing that old programming. Couple more and then I have to wrap up. I try and catch myself when my kid, I've already read that. Ellen says, I'm so grateful that my son is at Evoke right now. It allows me to avoid so many of the difficulties that so many parents with kids at home face. And I know he is safe. I feel good because I sent him when he was ready. He came on his own, and that is helping me deal with all of this and his next steps without so much panic. Thank you so much, Ellen. You know, another thing that I was thinking is another saying from AA and Al-Anon and 12 Steps is, I can't think of a better time in life to adopt the practice of the mantra of one day at a time. It's like this design from the universe where it said, oh, you don't understand addiction, you don't understand people with chronic anxiety or depression? Well, let me give you a pandemic. People say to me, what are you guys going to do next month, next week, maybe a month from now, 5 weeks from now? And my answer is, I don't know. We're doing it one day at a time. I can tell you what we're doing today. There's never been a time in my life, and maybe yours, never, where I have been coerced and forced to think of a one day at a time mindset. Isn't that amazing? One of the very mantras that is maybe the most famous in the addiction community is something all of us are being coerced to live with every day. Barbara says, my son was at Cascades 4 years ago. Kelly says, Michael, I've been there. You're being so courageous right now. Nancy says, thanks, Brad. This has been a great reboot. Robin says, this is so helpful. Thank you. Michael says, is anyone else struggling with looking away from the news and social media? Like, I know it's bad for me, but I feel like I can't look away. It's a bad movie. I'd be surprised if anybody, Michael, who has any relationship with social media can't relate to that. And I've had to turn it off and turn away, right? I'll end with this, or what Jennifer is saying. I'll end with that. 2 weeks ago, I could indulge myself in some of the negativity, even some of the political negativity I could probably tolerate and swallow 2 weeks ago. About 8 days ago, I wrote this blog on Psychology Today, which I told you about, called Uncommon Sense in Uncommon Times. You can find it on our social media or website, or just Google my name. I can't do it anymore. I'm already too stressed. When I start to read something on social media and I'm spending less time than I was 2 weeks ago. At first, when the social distancing happened, I spent more time on social media because I didn't have any immediate plans. But then I found myself being overwhelmed. But I found myself after that initial phase saying, if I start reading a post that's negative, I have to stop reading it. And I'm scrolling and looking for the things that fit right for me. I'm over some of the to-dos, but I'm looking for unique creative ideas and spiritual lessons and messages. I'm spending less time, but it is absolutely something we have to do. We have to do different things in different times. I'm going to wait for what Julie writes, and then I'm going to end with that. Julie says, I turned it off completely today. Meditated, worked, did yoga, and read. It felt good. Thank you. Thank you again for joining me. I'm going to be doing this every day this week at various times. I will reset it so that I send out the right link on our social media so you're not logging on as a presenter. I'm grateful to be with you. I'm grateful to share this with you. I'm grateful for my breath. I'm grateful for not having a chronic cough. I'm grateful for my health and the health of my family today, and that I get to connect with you and listen to you tonight. So thank you. I look forward. I hope to see many of you later on in the week this week. I think it's tomorrow night. I think it's at the same time. Let me see if I can find it. It's on my calendar. Tomorrow night it is at 7 o'clock Mountain Time, so a little bit later. 7 o'clock Mountain Time tomorrow night. So, and then it's earlier the next day. I think it's at 5:30 the next day. So thanks for joining us, folks. Love you all. We're all in this together. We're not alone. And thank you for those of you who shared not just your wisdom, but also your pain with us. Sometimes you'll be surprised to know that when you share your difficulty or pain or struggle, it helps those that feel alone, that are afraid to share it, not feel so alone. So have a great evening. I hope to see some of you the rest of the week. Take care, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye-bye.